Howdy, folks, and welcome back. Hope you are blessed and doing okay out there. Well, for today's video, I present to you one of my favorite railroads, the story of the New York Central. Now, I'll be honest, guys, there are some things I'm familiar with about them, and some things I am not. So I do the best I can to tell you guys what I do know. And we're going to use this for the glare when it comes up. So the New York Central was one of our earliest railways to operate in America, and I've got to make a small adjustment to my tripod here so I can see everything what I'm doing. There we go. And they ran from New York to Chicago, I believe. And they were in fierce competition with railroads like the Baltimore and Ohio and the Pennsylvania Railroad. They ran a lot of very cool and beautiful trains, some of the best ones we had. They broke a couple of records and had some pretty interesting people working for them. And sadly, they're not around anymore. Table of contents of what you're going to see, but this book will highlight a very good history of the New York Central Railway Company. Let's see. George Feather and someone's grand idea. Sorry, I cannot pronounce the last name. So this shows you the beginning of the NYC, and I guess how it got started. It probably started about the same time the B&O did, maybe later on. I forget the years of operation. To be honest, I haven't looked in a long time, but I'm assuming it was probably maybe in the 1840s or 1850s when it came to be. A lot of railroads came primarily after the Golden Spike was driven in 1869 because you could get steam engines out to California and start building your own railway. Now there's one of the earliest locomotives, the DeWitt Clinton, which hauled some of the early passenger trains on the NYC. Pretty cool looking locomotive. Tiny, but an innovation nonetheless. And there it is pulling a passenger train. The earliest passenger cars were simply stagecoaches on rails, because, well, that's all you had. And I do believe this train's been made only by a few companies, Bachmann, NHO, and Lionel and Gauge. Ah, busy times at the train station back in those days. You don't get scenes like this very much anymore. Same could be said for Amtrak today. 25 cents fare from Albany to Schenectady. Mohawk and Hudson Railroad, 2 shillings. 25 cents was a premium price back in those days. Now it's like $2,500 or $250, give or take. Here's some of my schedules and train tickets, it looks like. This stuff is actually pretty cool looking, I think. There is crossing over the river. The only route via Niagara Falls and Suspension Bridge, I think. Uterus, Cornings, Victim. Sorry guys, I can't pronounce half of these words. There's a map of the NYC, and looks like a timetable down there, possibly for the railway itself. I think one tycoon who tried to get his hands on them was the infamous Jay Gould, who was an empire builder just like James J. Hill was for the Great Northern and Northern Pacific. There's an advertisement under a steam engine, and one of the people who worked for the company, possibly one of the earliest presidents of the company itself. There's a New York Central American type with the proper northeastern style smokestack. Oh, that's a diamond stack. That's what that is. The Lakeshore Railroad was a competitor against them, and as we all know, the Lakeshore Limited still operates for Amtrak. That train name was saved, thankfully. The New York Central would break a record in the, I do believe it was 1895 or 1901, when the first steam locomotive, or should I say the first man-made vehicle they had, what am I trying to say? They had the first man-made vehicle to go past 100 miles an hour, and I think it's in this book. There's another schedule with some prices right there. That's pretty cool. The Vanderbilts take the throttle. So a man named Cornelius Vanderbilt came into New York Central and took over, started really to bring things up to speed on the railway and make train travel a bit better and more luxurious back then. Kind of what Fred Harvey would do for the Santa Fe Railway and George Pullman would do for different railways across the country. But he was also an infamous business tycoon, as you guys may know. Is that it? No, but that's a similar class to what I'm thinking of. So an engine called the 999 would break a record and go past 100 miles an hour. And again, I forget the year. I think it went about 112 miles an hour. And you can find it on display today at the Museum of Science and Industry in New York. It might be in this book, like I said. Now we're looking at some early buildings, and that's probably an early train station right there. The biggest station on the NYC, owned by them, not counting the Union Terminal in Chicago, was Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan. Steam trains would operate in and out of New York City for a long time until a fatal accident banned steam locomotives for good from entering or exiting the city. One train slammed into the back of another. A lot of people didn't make it out in one piece, I am sorry to say. The ban is still in use today in the state of New York. There's one of the early steam trains right there. I'm staring again. I don't know why, guys. One of the rail yards right there. Pardon me, guys. Building a railroad. Well, to build a railroad, it takes a lot of time and effort and money. But it can be done. Oh, that's a sad sight to see. That's what a train wreck looks like back then. Yeah, crazy. Ooh, look at that. My lord. What a wreck that was. I think these were cartoons, or, continental cartoons or something like that, about everything and what they were doing. Or these are just paintings. I can't tell what they are, to be honest, guys. Here's some of the steam engines they had in building the railway, as you guys can see. It was quite a process. Well, it's quite a process. What am I saying? I don't know. Keep in mind, these videos are not rehearsed. That's one of their consolidations. It's a small consolidation, but still a pretty cool looking engine. Number 2306. Nice. New York also had trolley cars operating through Manhattan, and they still have some to this day, I believe. As a lot of you may know, the entire transit system of New York is electrified with the NYCTA running underground. Here we go. The 20th century. This was probably their best era and decade because they had some of the best streamliners ever built. Example, these right here. These are 3 of the 20th century limited steam locomotives the New York Central operated. Henry Dreyfuss would design a lot of locomotives for New York Central. And that might be him right there. Is it? No, that is not. That is George H. Dreyfus. Or Daniels, I should say. I recognize him. Sorry, guys. There's a few more of the early advertisements. Again, this is some cool stuff. Now that's a pretty cool scene right there. Lining up for a photo shoot with a steam train and some passenger cars. I like these group pictures showing men and women and people coming together to show their progress on the railway. My favorite is still the Golden Spike picture from 1869. Pretty cool, actually. Now there's a very interesting engine, a 266, which has soon become a 466. These were great for yard switching around the main line. Well, around the rail yard, I should say. There's a Mogul, a modern one. Not bad looking, actually. There's a Pacific and one of their big electric locomotives. So after that crash underground, the New York Central needed a way to get their passengers on their way once they were out of Manhattan. The solution? They simply electrified the line. An electric locomotive would take the passenger cars down into the tunnels under Manhattan. People would get on, it'd bring them up, and at a certain point it would detach, and the steam engine would take the train the rest of the way. The tradition would continue with diesel locomotives too. Today, though, I don't think freight trains run in and out of the city of Manhattan like they did back then underground. So here we have I think that's a Prairie type and an 080 switcher. That's a USRA locomotive right there. Pretty cool. So there's a 20th Century Limited designed by Henry Dreyfus. Just a beautiful looking train. The front of the locomotive kind of looks like a Roman helmet. That could be where the design came from. There's two other electrics. I recognize that one. That is the S2. The Line of Train Corporation, when they started making trains, would base a lot of their electric designs off of this particular engine, along with the Milwaukee Roads bipolar later on. That's a pretty small steam engine right there. Pretty cool, though. Beautiful images and paintings of the trains as well right here. I like that one. And I like that one too. Beautiful nighttime shot. Grand Central Terminal. The most famous train station in the entire world. And it's still in use today. Just gorgeous. People still hustle and bustle through here, hopping on subway trains. Decline, merger, and collapse. Now, just in case they're not shown, a few more trains would include the Empire State Express, the Mercury, and the Commodore Vanderbilt. There was even a movie made called 20th Century Limited. Pretty funny film. Check it out if you have not seen it. Another funny train movie is Broadway Limited. Oh, wait. What have we got here? Now, I can't tell what's going on. They might be about to christen the new train. There actually is, I do believe, a 20th Century Limited passenger car you can rent and ride on what was most of the NYC route trackage originally behind an Amtrak locomotive. So this was the modernization of the 20th Century Limited being pulled by diesel locomotives. The NYC would get a different paint scheme for their passenger service, which actually looks pretty cool. Yes, they even had articulate engines, like this 2662 Mallet. I forgot about that entirely, guys. There's a 482 Mohawk and a 484 Niagara. I'll have you thinking, well, wait a second, a 484 is Northern. Well, yes, they are. The Northern Pacific called them that, but not every railway called them that. Called them a Northern. The New York Central called them Niagaras after Niagara Falls, which actually is not a bad idea. That's a beautiful name for a locomotive. Although, to be honest, I'm used to seeing them with the elephant ears or smoke deflectors on the side, not up in front like this. I'm sorry if I sound a bit off, guys. I'm recovering from some allergies. There is an unstreamlined Hudson right there, and there is one of the Niagaras with the smoke deflectors. There we go. These engines were actually pretty powerful and pretty lightweight and did a great job for the NYC Railway. I do not believe a single one was preserved, which is really sad. But luckily, you can find them in miniature. There is an RS3 down there. Yeah, that could be Mr. Cornelius Vanderbilt himself. It's been a while since I've researched this railway, to be honest, guys. The NYC conquered the world in the 40s like the Beatles would do in the 60s. A Hudson at the bottom and a Niagara at the top. Supposedly, there were 4 runaway Niagaras with somebody on board, which would become supposedly the inspiration for the movie Runaway Train with John Voight in the 1980s. That's what I was told, but I could be wrong. Now we're seeing some of their freight engines. I think that's an RSD-12 and a couple of Century units down there. The paint schemes look a bit different. My favorite, though, has always been this one, the line stripe paint scheme. Just so bold and unique looking. It looks good on their passenger trains, too, like this Alco PA here, the F units and the E units. Line trains would develop the New York Central F units many years later. I think they were number 2344 or 2345. Those ran for 8 years, while the Santa Fe 2343 would run for 18 years from the Lionel Train Company. There's a variety that's actually preserved, thankfully, and I do believe there's a short line railway in New York that actually carries on the line stripe paint scheme, but they put their name on it instead. But still, it's pretty cool to see a classic diesel operating like that. There's one of their freight F units right there. I'll say this much about an F unit, guys, or any unit. It doesn't matter if it's a freight scheme or a passenger scheme. It just looks so beautiful and bold. But that's just me. Alright, we gotta talk about this merger. So, at one time, the New York Central would merge with the Pennsylvania Railroad to form what will become known as the Penn Central. Seemed like a good idea to save 2 classic railways. But it did not work out. It went south pretty fast. There were a lot of problems, including financial problems and communication issues, worn out track, worn out equipment, and a bunch of potato companies went out of business because a lot of them potatoes are left in freight cars and they just rotted themselves out. History in the Dark does a more detailed video about the Penn Central Railway and the merger. If anything was interesting about the Penn Central, they operated these cool Metroliner cars. They had engines like that too. I think that's Navco. There was one film made about the Penn Central, which I find funny because the New York Central Railroad and Pennsylvania Railroad had several promotional films made back then, and several people rail-fanned it. And there were rail-fanning films about the Penn Central, but only one promotional or public announcement film was made for the Penn Central. It was a plea for help because all the money they were losing. Now there's New York Central Passenger F unit with the lightning strike paint scheme. Again, love that paint scheme, just beautiful. There's one of the Jeeps and another F unit right there. In 1971, a new company called Amtrak would be founded to kind of save the passenger trains, and they started running on the New York Central Railroad. And this was one of their trains, the Turboliner, which did pretty well for the most part. No, I'm sorry, that's yeah, there's a Turboliner. Never mind, not the Turbo train, the Turboliner. And Amtrak still does operate on the New York Central trackage, although with the ugly Siemens Chargers, unfortunately. There's the clock tower at Grand Central. Pretty cool looking. I love the design of it. It's so bold. You can still ride on New York Central's water level route or the Hudson route altogether. One thing I forgot to mention about the NYC is they had a pretty unique concept running their trains on the fly to get water. They would have what would be called a water pan, which was a trench dug into the tracks. I think it was about maybe 60 or 70 feet deep and about maybe a mile long. And the steam engines would why can't I talk? The steam engines would lower a special device from the tender that would scoop up the water into the water tank on the fly. They didn't have to stop for fuel. Well, they didn't have to stop for water along the way. Now, I thought that was pretty ingenious for the NYC. There's the last page and the index. So you may be wondering, what happened to New York Central? Well, it went the same way that a lot of classic railways we know and love did go. After the merger with the Penn Central, it was bought up by Norfolk Southern. And today, 2 heritage units honor them. There's a New York Central heritage unit on the SG-70 Ace, and I think the Penn Central paint scheme is also on an Ace, but I forget. But either way, seeing those is pretty cool. So in a way, the tradition and the legacy lives on in New York Central as one of the best railways America had. Okay, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sorry about the stuttering. Until next time, please like, subscribe, and comment. Please be safe around trains, and remember, God loves all of us. Happy rails, guys. See y'all next time.